The Defence Secretary gone, no word of a replacement, the PM's authority in tatters. How did it come to this? With me here live is the Minister who was fighting alongside John Healey for that crucial spending deal. Some wondered whether he'd take over at the Department of Defence. Others wondered if he'd quit. We'll hear from Carns in just a moment, but first let's get the story of the day from our Defence and Security Editor, Deborah Haynes.
Are you willing to accept anything less?
John Healey in a last-ditch public plea for more money.
I'm not going to comment on figures. The Prime Minister knows what defence and the nation needs. He's set to make his announcement soon.
Barely 24 hours later, though, it was the Defence Secretary who was setting the agenda. In a damning resignation letter, he accused Sir Keir Starmer of risking national security by failing to fund a major defence investment plan properly. Mr Healey wrote, "Your DIP financial settlement falls well short of what's required for defence and the country at this dangerous time. Without a DIP that meets the moment in this way, I'm being forced to make decisions that would reduce the readiness of our forces and increase the risk to personnel on operations and could make the country less safe." No other British Defence Secretary is thought to have resigned on a point of principle quite like this before, at least not in living memory. That makes the move even more of a devastating blow for the Prime Minister's already dwindling authority. It also underlines the gravity of the crisis facing the UK armed forces, hollowed out since the end of the Cold War and now urgently needing to rearm to confront new threats. The absence so far of any official response from the Prime Minister to the loss of his Defence Secretary, a sign of utter disarray at the heart of government. The Conservative leader was quick to fill the void.
He has done the honourable thing and resigned. I am glad that he agrees with me that we need to put more money into defence. But what is shocking is what he's written in his letter, where he says that the Prime Minister is making the country less safe and putting our troops at risk at a time of increasing threats.
But defence was hollowed out under the Tories too. Labour had pledged to fix the mess, publishing a major review last year that set out how to modernise and transform the Army, Navy and Air Force at a time of mounting threats. Yet a funded plan to turn the vision into a reality never followed. Instead, there were months of wrangling between the Treasury and the Ministry of Defence over how much extra money was needed for the military and where it would come from.
This culminated in an extraordinary few days here at the Ministry of Defence. I mean, what must people inside that building be thinking? I understand Mr Healey was told on Monday he'd be receiving a much smaller amount of additional money than he and his military chiefs have been asking for. He pushed back. In particular, he's looking for a clear commitment to increase defence spending to 3% of GDP by 2030, up from around 2.3% now, which would mean tens of billions of pounds of extra money for defence. But the Prime Minister and his Chancellor have yet to budge. So where are we? Right now, the UK's defence plans are in limbo. Its allies and enemies will be watching on in horror or amusement. And what about the military chiefs? Surely they too will be thinking about their future if more money doesn't come fast.
The head of NATO said he respected Mr Healey, who should have been in Brussels next week.
What we are seeing all over the alliance is countries increasing their defence investments. And of course, it's not easy, because in the end there is always a trade-off with other expenses, which are also important. But the core task of every government in the end is keeping the country safe and making sure that there is a strong economy. These are the two pillars for our deterrence and defence.
Unless Keir Starmer can fix his defence disaster, he'll face difficult questions from allies, including Donald Trump, when he attends a summit of NATO leaders in July. Though that does depend on whether he's still Prime Minister by then. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Well, here with me now is the Armed Forces Minister, Carns. Al, are you still a minister?
I am. I'm the Minister of Armed Forces within the Defence. Yeah.
OK, for now at least. We'll come to that a bit later, perhaps. Has John Healey, though, made the right decision to quit?
I think John is an exceptionally hard-working and principled man, and I think he left on that principle. I've worked with him now for 2 years, and he has worked tirelessly to better equip defence and support the people within it.
And do you agree with his assessment that the failure to find the cash that the MOD's been asking for risks leaving the country less safe?
Well, I think we live, and I've always said this, 24 years in the Marines, we live in a more geopolitically dangerous time than ever before. And so finding the correct funding mechanism is absolutely essential. And I think the second also is making sure the Defence Investment Plan is as transformative as it can be. And I think the two need to meet in the middle to provide the right capability, kit and equipment for our armed forces.
Well, so what did you think when Number 10 presented you with the sign-off for this deal?
I wasn't in the Defence Investment Plan. I saw it 2 weeks ago. And when I saw it, I wasn't happy with the level of transformation within it, particularly the lessons from Ukraine, uncrewed systems, automation, and pulling those lessons into every section of our armed forces. So I think there's much more work to be done in that space. But then when you match that with the funding settlement as we move to 2030, it isn't enough. And that's quite dangerous at a critical moment in sort of the geopolitical situation that we live.
I mean, you're a serving minister talking about a decision made, Number 10 in Treasury, making the country more dangerous. That's extraordinary, isn't it?
I think what we need to do with the funding settlement is find innovative ways of finding the right amount of resource to give the kit and equipment to the armed forces.
So what, like war bonds, for example?
Well, I think we need to explore all of those options, whether it's a Defence Security Resilience Bank, whether it's some of the Treasury mechanisms, whether it's copying what Germany has done, which is, in some cases, as long as the markets could accept it, with other allies, looking at some of the fiscal rules around borrowing for defence. I think we need to really look at this seriously and explore every option.
So, yes, so the Chancellor should sort of waive some of the fiscal rules specifically for this defence?
Well, we need to very carefully think about that because of the impacts for the markets and bonds, etc. But what I would say is we need to explore every option to ensure that we have the maximum amount of resource for defence and national security as a whole. As we, not only in this very dangerous geopolitical time, but I've been on the record in the next 2 to 3 years, there's every chance we'll be tested. And we can't allow, we can't fail, and we can't allow our men and women on the front line to be under-equipped. Critical at the moment, in the middle of this discussion and the political furore that's going on, is right now, as we speak, there's probably fast jets flying defensive combat air missions in the Middle East with pilots. There are people probably in trenches in Estonia supporting the Estonians, against that threat from Russia. And there will be people at sea all over the world protecting, the freedoms that we enjoy.
And they're being put at risk by this government's decision.
They will be looking back into the system and wondering what's going on. And I think it's really important, no pun intended, that we steady the ship and do right by them.
So when you got that plan from Number 10, when you saw it and it really wasn't fit for purpose, did you think about quitting yourself?
Well, when the defence good hesitation there. The defence investment plan as a whole, I haven't been involved in, and I found that very strange, as in the construct of what was in that plan. But I can understand some of the reasons why not, because I can disrupt things every now and again. I wouldn't say alarmed, but I was very concerned that it wasn't necessarily heeding the lessons from Ukraine. Particularly on drones and uncrewed systems, and how cheap systems are replacing large, expensive bits of kit, such as, in some cases, heavy armour, all the way through to major combatant platforms at sea. And I wanted to see more of the new, innovative way of fighting that the Ukrainians are teaching us. Yeah. There are some false lessons from there as well, but some of those lessons pulled into the dip and the very central premise of it, rather than jammed in at the back end with a lower percentage of the funding.
I'll come back to some of those innovative things you're talking about, but is it fair to say, you hesitated when I asked if you'd considered quitting, is it fair to say you are currently considering your position?
So within the situation, I need to do what is right by the armed forces. And if I don't think that's right, then I will absolutely consider my position. And from my perspective at the moment, we have not closed with this deal. When we have closed with this deal, I will decide my position.
Right, so you're putting Number 10 on notice, effectively. If you don't get what you believe is right for the armed forces out of this defence investment plan, you will also follow John Healey out the door. I will decide on my position within the government. I think we need to be really, really clear. There are two things that we need to look at. First is the capability, so the tanks, the ships, the bombs, the bullets that we give to our armed forces, the physical component. And then I've been really clear on one other issue, which isn't talked about, is the moral component.
and that's about the Northern Ireland Legacy Act. And until we see changes in those two elements, I will definitely consider my position until they're changed.
Number 10 doesn't know you're doing this interview, do they?
I'm not sure.
I mean, all authority and control has sort of broken down in the government, hasn't it?
No, I think, I'll be really clear. From my perspective, Keir Starmer's a good man. I think he's an integral man. I think he's an honest man. I think he's trying his very best in very difficult circumstances.
But does he have the authority at the moment?
So I'm a junior minister, so my engagement with Number 10 is actually very limited. You know, I work either to John Healey or the Secretary of State for Defence within the department. So my engagement is limited. My view on Number 10 as a whole is it's trying its very best to come to some very complex solutions to difficult problems.
Have they offered you the job of Defence Secretary?
So I haven't had any offer to date. I'm not expecting an offer. I want to do my job. I want to steady the ship and get on with supporting those people we just talked about on the front line or at sea or in the air that are defending our citizens, our allies and our country.
Would you relish the chance of steadying the ship at the top of that department?
Well, I think you've got a very difficult problem to deal with. The Defence Investment Plan needs transformed, which is difficult to do, and that means more time. We've already waited a long time for the Defence Investment Plan. The financial piece needs to be settled, and the two of those different elements, piece of the jigsaw, need to connect together to provide the right kit for armed forces within the right settlement, so we can get on with equipping our army off and military, Army, Navy and Air Force off into the next couple of years.
Do you think you might get sacked for doing this interview?
What will happen? What will happen? I think we've got to a point now. Well, I'm being really honest. I'm often get my head down and keep my head down and get on with doing the job. And I think now we just need to discuss and openly challenge some of the issues that we have, whether that be Northern Ireland legacy all the way through, in particular, to defence investment. And indeed, the plan that has been designed within defence as well, and make sure it's changed and fit for purpose.
Well, is the Strategic Defence Review itself fit for purpose? You talked about, needing to do sort of more innovative things like drones, for example, and prioritise them. Is it fit for purpose, or do you need to go back to the drawing board now?
Well, my view is what you're seeing in Ukraine is almost like computing power. It's doubling every 2 years. Like the transformation is moving at such a phenomenal pace. And I think some elements of the SDR are already, I wouldn't say out of date, but have been overtaken by events. And it is moving faster than ever before, because innovation moves exceptionally fast when you're in conflict or when you're being challenged, particularly by a hostile state.
Do you know what? You've been very honest. So be honest with me now. Where is this going wrong? Is it Number 10? Is it the Treasury? Is it the MOD? Is Rachel Reeves the problem? Does she need to go?
No, I think I'll be really honest with you. The problem is it's on both sides of where I genuinely believe the Defence Investment Plan has not been transformative enough. It hasn't adopted the three key principles, lessons from Ukraine, resilience for the country, we can talk about that in a second, and then integration across the Army, Navy and Air Force. We're not big enough to have, large capability programmes that can only fit one profile.
Yeah, but why hasn't it done that? Is that Number 10? Is it the Treasury?
There's a bit of that, because remember, and I've been in and out of defence for a long time, and I think there's been some really hard work by very good people on the Defence Investment Plan, but it's also quite difficult to change when you're in such a big bureaucracy. And I think usually that comes from sort of political impetus to sort of move the dial. And I think we've got to change further. We've got to wake people up to the revolution that's taking place in Ukraine and move faster. And then the second piece is we've got to find the right funding settlement. And importantly, that's got to be in line with our international allies and partners. We have a standing in the world, Great Britain. We may sometimes think about division, discord, and everybody paints the clouds grey and then tries to sell you an umbrella here in the UK. The reality is across the world, we're held in very high regard. That's linked to defence spending and in some cases our position in the security space.
Will you talk about the spending settlement and getting it right and so on? A Treasury source has been briefing that, let's be clear on what John is asking for, cuts to schools and hospitals.
I don't think it's as black and white in that, but I will also agree that defence and resilience isn't just about bombs, bullets and battleships. It's actually about whether someone in their family in Middle England can not just exist, they can live and they can thrive. It's about ensuring you have spare money at the end of the month. It's about getting a steady wage. It's about going to the NHS and getting treated so you can get back into work and get healthy. It's about schools. I completely agree. That is resilience. That is defence as a whole. And we've got to start looking at it in a much more broader and holistic view than welfare or warfare. It's just not as simple as that.
Well, yeah, but you have got to look at cutting welfare, haven't you? Given the scale, the welfare budget, if you look at that compared to the defence budget.
So I've always been, and Pat McFadden I thought was very good last Sunday on Laura Kuenssberg, talking about what we have done in the welfare space. More needs to be done. I'm not going to shy away from that problem. Of course it does.
And does the authority have the... does the Prime Minister have the authority to drive that through the backbenches?
Well, it needs to
didn't
be.
Last
we
time.
need to move forward, because at the moment we are faced with very difficult decisions in exceptionally dangerous times. I always say this: if you don't have a secure and effective defence or national security architecture that is well funded and that has high morale and the physical component is well rounded, you don't have a state. So it's as simple as that. The first duty of any government is to keep the country safe. And that's why I think we need to find alternative methods or innovative methods to find that defence funding.
Does Rachel Reeves get that, though?
I think Rachel Reeves and John Healey have had multiple discussions. I'm sure Keir Starmer and the three of them have talked, until their ears are bleeding about this subject. The reality is, if you have seen what I have seen over the last probably 10 years, 16 years of my career in particular, and then what I see now as a minister, the world is becoming exceptionally dangerous. We've got to take that very seriously. And I'm not saying 2.68, we've got to jump it right up. We've got to think innovatively about how we find the money to square this circle. And then we've got to challenge defence to make sure that defence investment plan is as transformative as possible, that puts the right kit into the armed forces' hands.
But why haven't you done all this already? I mean, it's been 2 years.
Well, I haven't been included in the defence investment plan, so I'll be really honest. I saw it 2 weeks ago, and then I've tried to reverse engineer bits onto the side of it, which is, and to be fair, there's been some really good people working on it. And then from a government perspective, we need to close and join the jigsaw.
Yeah, how urgently does that need to be done?
The trouble is we've been waiting a long time for this already. And we talked about the SDR, I wouldn't say going out of date, but something's been overtaken by events. I've talked about Ukraine's revolution speeding up. And so you're always trying to catch this revolution in technology. And so we've got to move faster than ever before.
So is it possible to get this fit for purpose by the NATO summit?
I think we can do it.
Really?
I hope so.
It sounds like there's quite a lot of work involved.
I think they need to do it. We've got to do it.
So do you think it can be done in days?
No, weeks.
I mean, you're sitting here now. You don't know who your boss is. You don't have a defence secretary.
Sort of self. The reality is the military, while we at the political level continue to, move around, the military system is very stable, very secure.
Yeah, but
and they'll be working on this
it?
at the moment.
I mean, we don't know who the defence secretary is. Over 7 hours after John Healey quit.
I'm sure there'll be a decision soon.
But you don't know who that is right now.
I'm sat here talking to you, so I definitely don't know.
And you're definitely not throwing your hat in the ring.
My view, I'm getting on with my job.
But would you like to get on with your job, steadying the ship, as you put it, at the top of that department?
I think
you're an ambitious man.
Well, there's a difference between those that have served, between ambition and service. I don't, as I run through this is not about me. This is about the people that are in the trenches on the ships and in the airplanes around the world defending this country. Ambition, the only reason I would like to be in a position to enact change, the only reason I came into government wasn't for money, power, resource or ambition. It was to make change. Why? What was my
and how's that going?
What was my aim all about? It was about taking the lessons from Ukraine and making sure they're learnt here into our armed forces. And we've achieved a bit of that, but not as much as I would have liked.
OK, so sitting here now, what do you think our allies make of this shambles?
Well, I think as our allies look in, I always say this, we often think very negatively of the UK. I think actually across the world we're seen as a pretty powerful and influential nation. I think this is an internal political machination that will be sorted out in hours and days rather than weeks, months and years.
Right. And Putin, what do you think he makes of it?
Well, I think those in Moscow will be looking in with probably glee at some of the stuff that's going on.
How hard did John Healey fight? Just give us a sense of what was going on behind the scenes, how hard he pushed for this settlement to be
I think this fight has been going on for months. I'm in charge of operations and policy, so I've been focused on the operations and policy part of the department. But on the peripheries, you could see a huge amount of energy going into this fight. The problem is the word around fight. It shouldn't be fight. It should be a collective agreement on where our resources need to be put to best effect. And from my perspective, in this case, we need to find a solution to this as quickly as feasibly possible.
Do you think John Healey would make a good Prime Minister?
So from my perspective, there's lots of people running around talking about Prime Minister, this, that and the other. I think anyone who wants a job probably doesn't understand the difficulties of that job, both personally and professionally, and the complexities of doing it. I've worked with various Prime Ministers in and out from my military career, and everyone has had an exceptionally tough time. It's the hardest job in the country.
But people are talking about him as a potential caretaker candidate, perhaps even more. Knowing the man as you do, does he have the qualities you need?
Well, first of all, caretakers look after empty football stadiums and empty schools. They do a fantastic job, by the way. So I don't think we should be describing anyone as a caretaker Prime Minister as the last thing we need. We need a Prime Minister that can lead from the front, make the courageously difficult decisions and move this country forward.
Does he have those leadership qualities, though?
John's a good man. Yeah.
He's a good leader?
He's a good man. And, you know, there's lots of people out there talking about leadership and
well, including yourself.
Themselves.
People are suggesting you could be a leader.
I've always been clear on this, that anyone who wants that job doesn't understand the totality of it.
You're not ruling it out, though, are you?
The only thing I have ever said is if someone fires a starting gun, I'm not scared of gunfire.
Well, someone has fired the starting gun.
Well,
you know, Wes Streeting has.
They haven't done the leadership challenge yet.
OK. Well, that's the Andy Burnham answer. Is this the beginning of your leadership pitch?
No, this is my beginning of trying to sort out some of the problems that we have, both in defence and cross-government, to find a financial settlement that's fit for purpose and a defence investment plan that has learnt the lessons from Ukraine and gives the best capability to both our armed forces and, importantly, allows us to dock into our allies and partners to defend the country.
Just standing back, one of Keir Starmer's biggest allies has quit today. You know, he was so loyal, John Healey. And the fact that he's quit, and with such a devastating resignation letter, the international repercussions of all of this, where does this leave the Prime Minister's authority, in your view?
So I think the Prime Minister needs to do everything he can to steady this ship around finance and then around capability for defence.
Can he do it?
I think he can do it, and he needs to do it quickly. But I know they will be working very hard, Number 10 and across defence, to make sure that happens. And as I said, I'll sort of finish where I started. Geopolitically, we're in an exceptionally dangerous period of time. A lot of the conflicts overseas are actually affecting people's pockets, the money in their pockets back here in the UK. Sometimes you don't necessarily know it, but £15 billion worth of cyber attacks just here in the UK alone. There's an influence battle going on, sponsored by hostile states. And we've seen a 30% increase in Russian activity, both surface and subsurface, off our coasts. And so this is a dangerous time. We have war in Ukraine that's caused 1.5 million casualties. That's more casualties than America took in the entire Second World War. And when you add that in with the Straits of Hormuz and the impact economically that is yet to hit us, we have headwinds coming, and we need really strong leadership to punch through that and make sure this country is safe and secure and everyone can not just exist but live and thrive.
So Keir Starmer's really got days to show he's got what it takes.
Let's watch this space.
Well, we certainly will. Al Carns, it's pretty unusual to have you in the studio when, I know you haven't got permission to do this, so who knows what's going to happen next. I should ask you really to check your phone and see what Number 10 is saying. But I really appreciate you coming in and sharing that with us.
It's an important discussion at an important time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The thing about John Healey is that he was such a loyal ally to Keir Starmer. He was such a safe pair of hands. And, a few months ago, when there was a lot of speculation about who might replace Keir Starmer, he was touted as a potential unity candidate, and his aides rubbished that at the time. And now, all the speculation is starting again, because his resignation has plunged the government into crisis. It could, in theory, collapse Keir Starmer's government in the coming days and weeks. So could he then emerge as a caretaker candidate, keeping the seat warm for Andy Burnham if he wins his by-election? It's possible. Well, Deborah is here on the sofa along with our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam, first, what do you make of that?
That was an important interview. That was a big moment in a massive day. What you saw there was one of the most important people with military expertise in this government heaping pressure on the Prime Minister. So just to recap, John Healey resigns because he doesn't think that Keir Starmer's prepared to spend enough on defence. After that resignation, Number 10 and Number 11 make absolutely clear they are comfortable with the position that they have adopted, putting out statements like John Healey wanted to cut schools and hospitals. And then 3 hours later, Al Carns sits on this sofa as a serving minister bound by collective responsibility and says, we need more, right? I am not entirely sure if the Prime Minister has the authority of the office, how Al Carns can be judged to be complying with collective responsibility and stay in his job right now.
Yeah.
He clearly does not accept the settlement of the Prime Minister, claims that in the next few days he will work to fight to overturn it. That is not the message we're getting tonight from number 10 and number 11. Is this government about to lose another minister?
Well, I mean, he said at the end there, he gave Keir Starmer days to turn this around, didn't he? Watch this space. Keir Starmer's... I mean, just to pick a few more moments of the interview where, you know, you heard Al Carns just musing about what needs to happen now. How do you think number 10's going to respond to that?
At this moment, number 10 is in abject chaos. One of the most striking things about today is the tone coming out of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves subsequent to John Healey's resignation. It wasn't warm about a loyal ally with whom they had a principled disagreement. It was cold, it was bitter, it was picky towards the way and the arguments that he advanced. They could see the utter devastating damage that John Healey has done to Keir Starmer. You know, Keir Starmer already in an incredibly weakened position, 7 days away from possibly the biggest rival possible coming into Parliament. And there was Al Carns, who is not a man without ambition, and you talked about that at the end of the interview. But
the starting gun has not been fired, Sam.
There was a smile on his face, and we understand what he's doing. I don't think Al Carns is about to be our next Prime Minister, let's be absolutely honest. But what I felt that interview and him leaning into ambition and bluntly, directly challenging the Prime Minister on a difficult day from within government, Cathy. It was extraordinary. That interview was extraordinary to watch. Just suggests that Keir Starmer's writ is done. It's shot.
Deborah, just delving a little bit deeper into what he said on defence and, you know, proposing this alternative funding mechanisms, talked about tweaking the fiscal rules specifically for defence. He sort of said the blame, really, for what's gone on should be shared between the MOD, number 10, and the Chancellor. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I thought he was very clear that the money... I mean, I thought the language that he used, that it's dangerous if the money doesn't come, and that is coming from a man who's not just an armed forces minister, but a veteran of the armed forces. He's been...
He's fought his way out of a cave, hasn't he?
He has. I mean, he's a very senior officer who has served on the front line. He knows what he's talking about. He also absolutely understands. I mean, you heard him as he was walking out, drones, drones, drones. I mean, he's not droning on. He is absolutely on the money in terms of the transformation that needs to happen at pace to defence and that isn't happening because of this absolutely ludicrous paralysis that we've had over the last year. And there has been huge frustration behind the scenes, and it is now starting to burst out into the open. Yeah. I agree with Sam. It's extraordinary to hear a serving minister come on and really, you know, be almost a rebel with inside government.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in discussion with him about whether he was going to come do this interview, I sort of assumed he would quit and then come in. But no, he's come in without getting permission to sit on the sofa and sort of launch this missile, Exocet missile, right into number 10.
Yeah, well, it'd be very interesting to see whether he is still in his job by the end of the day.
Or the end of the show.
And he was in Makerfield earlier this week, wasn't he, sort of helping with Andy Burnham's campaign. But I do think it's also very interesting and telling that we've had that letter issued by the Prime Minister to John Healey, which is pretty curt. There's not a lot of warmth in there, is there? But I think the fact that we are, 7 hours now since the resignation, and still no word on who's going to be the Defence Secretary. And I was speaking to sources earlier saying that who would want the job, frankly? I mean, the Defence, it is absolutely extraordinary for a Defence Secretary to quit in the manner that John Healey has gone. Yes, we've had Defence Secretaries go, but it's usually under a cloud of scandal, not quitting in the national interest in opposition to government policy. I mean, that hasn't happened in living memory. And so anyone stepping in to fill that void needs to accept what it needs to reject what John Healey's just said and keep on going and take the whole department with him. And if they want to do that because they are ambitious, why would they do that with a Prime Minister that may only have days to go?
It feels to me like, though, if we're being honest, there are a couple of almost insoluble problems here, because I understand and I hear the argument and the certainty of the defence establishment asking for more money, convinced that Britain is increasingly at risk. But there is
Which they are.
Which they are, and I'm not doubting that they are. But defence is not the only priority in this country. It's not the only priority for this government. And
well, except that, people say if you haven't got any... We heard Richard Barron's talking about if you haven't...
Let me make my
right.
argument.
There you go. I'm treating you like a minister, I'm sorry.
Yes, and I'm not putting up with that. However, what John Healey failed to do was to convince his cabinet colleagues that they should take cuts to their budgets, that schools, hospitals, transport should, give up some money in order to fund defence. What he failed to convince Rachel Reeves to do was to relax her borrowing rules or to put up taxes.
Which is what Al Carns is still talking about.
Which is what Al Carns is talking about. So I hear the argument from the defence establishment, and it's not for me to be convinced or otherwise about these arguments, but what I am observing is that they haven't won their cabinet colleagues, or I would argue the country. Does the country want to be taxed more for defence? Does the country want to see higher borrowing, and will the gilt markets put up with higher? There are arguments that the defence establishment think they've won that I do not think are even won around the cabinet table. And Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have taken the other position. Now, they will think that they have done so in a principled manner, and there is a legitimate and honest disagreement going on. But I put it to you that who is right is less certain right now than some are presenting.
But Al Carns is saying, you've got to cut welfare. He was pretty blunt about that. He supports Pat McFadden. And, Keir Starmer does not have the authority to get that through his backbenchers, does he?
Yeah, and that is because people think that not cutting welfare in a reckless way is more of a priority than putting money into a defence system. Some Labour backbenchers would point to some of the wastage in the defence system. Ajax tanks being a prime example. This isn't about my view. I hear all sides of the argument. What I am saying is that there is no absolute consensus in Labour politics about what should be done about this point. And John Healey represents one wing, but he hasn't won round the cabinet. He didn't win round his colleagues. He didn't win round MPs on the tough choices. Defence can't have money from, the magic money tree. It's got to come from somewhere else. And there isn't consensus about where that should be. That was on John Healey in part.
I can see Deb's itching to get in. Go on.
Please, let me
let it go.
Please. I mean, that's all very well, Sam, with your, peacetime mentality. But if that is the case...
Peacetime mentality.
But the problem is, though, really, is that the Prime Minister himself has set the agenda, and he has failed to make that discussion and to make that connection. He's the one that has come out when he was in Munich talking about hard power being the currency of the age, saying just recently that Russia could attack NATO by 2030, saying that we need to be ready for war, saying in his national security strategy that the UK needs to actively prepare for a direct threat to the home front, possibly in a wartime scenario. So if that is what he really believes, and his military chiefs believe, then you need to be able to fund the armed forces to be able to defend that. And that is what is missing.
Debs, it was interesting, you mentioned that Al Carns is a veteran. He talked about his people in the armed forces, serving right now and sort of watching what's going on. It was interesting that, wasn't it? How people outside in the armed forces, our allies, NATO, how will they be viewing all of this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, I can reveal to you that the head of the armed forces is understood to have sent an internal message to the troops, because it must be, like you say, very, very destabilising. I mean, now Carns is talking about warplanes that are flying around on operations, and they're looking back at home and seeing absolute chaos. Yeah. And I'll just read. I can just read a little bit of it. It's Air Chief Marshal Sir Rich Knighton. He sort of says about, obviously everyone will have seen that the Defence Secretary has resigned. There's been much written and said about the armed forces. Or there will be much written and said about the armed forces over the next few days, maybe preempting Al Carns coming and speaking to you. And he says it's important that we remain apolitical and are not drawn into speculation about discussions that are for ministers to make. In uncertain times, it is more important than ever that we stay focused on our duty to defend the UK and its interests across the world without fear or favour. So I think it is him trying to calm the ocean and calm the nerves and remind everyone that they are apolitical. But I mean, frankly, from what I've been hearing, the military chiefs, the other service chiefs, maybe not Sir Rich Knighton, but certainly others are not calm, are very unhappy with this settlement and believe they need more.
And, I realised the one question I didn't ask Al Carns was whether he thought military chiefs would quit. Damn it. Sam?
I think where you and I would absolutely agree is what we've seen today is an abject failure of politics, right? This shouldn't happen.
Chaotic.
This shouldn't happen because prime ministers should have teams that can work out alternatives, that they can smooth things through. Keir Starmer's sitting nearly alone in number 10. He doesn't have a chief of staff. There's no full-time director of communications. The operation is denuded. He's got 100 MPs against him. He's got members of his own cabinet that would back Andy Burnham to be prime minister. He has a sort of threadbare group of allies who are sort of holding him in place. And, you know, the capacity of this government to get things done is obviously disintegrating. On the defence investment plan, on the EU summit next month that we don't have a date for and an agenda that is crumbling. Just yesterday, a huge move 2 months ago to impose steel tariffs, reversed yesterday. This government doesn't have a grip. The fundamental big decisions are all over the place. So we get the Punch and Judy at PMQs on a Wednesday, but large bits of the real meat of what a government needs to do just simply aren't happening.
And when you think about, you know, we know how interviews normally work. You normally sort of bid through the centre and then you get sort of told which government minister you're getting. I mean, that's completely broken down. And in a small way, that symbolises the chaos going on behind the scenes, that Carns has basically come in here and just sort of gone, well, I'm just doing the interview, I'm taking my own decisions.
Look, there's no doubt that interview was a coup and an important moment, because you don't get ministers coming in the studio. You know what didn't happen? You didn't get the string of aides like little ducklings behind the king duck at the front,
nice
wobbling into the studio. He turned up alone. That tells you a story about a man in a government acting unilaterally, challenging the Prime Minister.
And there's a bit of breaking news actually, Sam. So let's tell you about this. Pamela Nash, MP, has resigned as a defence PPS, so a defence aide in the department. So this is the statement that she's put out just now. She says, it is with much sadness that I've written to the Prime Minister to tender my resignation as defence PPS. It has been a great privilege to serve alongside John Healey, who's been a tremendous Defence Secretary in such a volatile period. I will continue to work in Parliament in every way I can for my constituents. So that is the statement from Pamela Nash, who has resigned as Defence PPS. I mean, that department is in turmoil tonight, isn't it, Sam?
100%. Look, Pamela Nash is not going to be a household name. Not many of our viewers will be hanging off the work that she was doing. But what you can see is the political operation around John Healey just quietly deciding that they too are not going to put up with the status quo. And I think bit by bit we're seeing it's a devastating indictment on the ability or the inability at the centre of Keir Starmer's government to hold things in place. Look, we can all see what's going on from plain sight. 7 days today, there's a by-election in Makerfield. There are lots of candidates. You'll probably have to read out all their names in a second. But Andy Burnham is probably odds on to win that by-election, and then he will be back in Parliament, and he has made clear that he is likely to join the contest to become the next Prime Minister. I don't even think that there's going to be much of a fight, and within probably weeks he will be the next Prime Minister. So
you think it will be sort of truncated? There won't be a leadership contest in which maybe John Healey stands, maybe Carns, Wes Streeting? I
do not think the Labour Party has the appetite for a big fight. And I think that Keir Starmer ultimately, I mean, you look at his authority today, it's very hard after today to claim that he has the authority over his party as you watch the events and the resignation of Pamela Nash. I don't even think that Wes Streeting ultimately will have the numbers to launch a challenge. I think a transition will happen, I would say, most likely before the summer recess in the middle of July.
But can Keir Starmer's government survive until the by-election next week?
Yes. And the reason that it can survive until then is because A, it has to, and B, it's only 7 days. And but after that, I think what today did was it was another massive body blow. There's been talk over the last few days of a Keir Starmer fight back. If I'm being honest, Cathy, I never really paid that much attention to it. People privately tell me actually what's going on. He's just waiting to check that Andy Burnham does actually win this by-election, and then we'll see where we are. I don't think there's much fight. How could there be much fight? Look, we are 7.5 hours on from the resignation of John Healey. Who is his successor? The defence of the realm currently doesn't have a political chief in charge of it. That is extraordinary.
Well, I'll let you both go off and make some calls, and we'll bring you back in later for the latest updates. Who knows what will have happened by then. Thanks very much to both of you. Well, now, the United States has, of course, put pressure on NATO members to increase their defence budget. So how will John Healey's resignation and his accusations that the defence settlement falls well short of what's required be viewed stateside? Well, joining me now is the former US ambassador to NATO, Ivo Dolder. Ivo, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Let me ask you first.
Happy to be here.
Let me ask you first what NATO will make of what's gone on today here in the UK, here in Westminster.
So the kind of discussion you just had is an internal political discussion that of course, people will be watching keenly. But what they're really interested in is what is the outcome ultimately when it comes to the actual investment that can be is forthcoming. I mean, clearly, the UK has, through this government, through the SDR, through all the processes, decided that it needs to increase defense spending, and indeed, the NATO requirements are that it should increase defense spending, and that the path that John Healey laid out in his letter is a path that one always hoped would be followed. The UK has an issue. On the one hand, it has always spent about 2% of GDP on defense, unlike so many other allies. That's great. But on the other hand, when it comes to how it spent that money, particularly on the procurement side, a lot of it has been going to the modernization of the nuclear forces and not to the modernization and capabilities of the conventional forces. And ultimately, while nuclear weapons are extremely important for deterrence, it's conventional forces that are going to win the war that the Prime Minister and the intelligence community is warning could happen as soon as 4 years from now.
Well, we had the still currently serving Armed Forces Minister on the show just a minute ago, and he was talking about how he's been pushing behind the scenes for a much more, for more innovative spending on things like drones, for example. And it doesn't appear that Downing Street and the Treasury get that. So this is the crucial point, isn't it, that the Prime Minister and his Chancellor have got to get their heads around?
Well, I'm not sure about the details of the defense investment plan. We have not seen it. But I would warn against the idea that we can arm ourselves on the cheap. The idea that because drones are very cheap in Ukraine, that are developed in Ukraine, and that the Ukrainians are using those drones very effectively on the front lines and in deep strike capabilities against the Russians, that all we need is a bunch of drones and we'll be fine. I don't think that's going to be the answer. We still need a totally integrated military command. We need ships that sail. We need aircraft that fly. We need tanks that can shoot and drive. And we need an integrated command and control structure that allows those armed forces to do what they are supposed to be doing. And let's remember, the threat we have is not just from Russia, but unfortunately, the United States is in the middle of trying to figure out how it is going to reduce its commitment to Europe. So as the U.S. does less, Europe needs to do more. This is the wrong time not to be spending more on defense.
So what do you say to people who say, well, you know, Britain simply can't afford it? Our taxes are already at record levels, borrowing can't go much higher, and, you know, there's a big welfare bill for sure, but, you know, the Chancellor doesn't really want to cut that because we can't get it through the Labour backbenchers here. So what do you say to people who say, well, we can't afford to spend more here in the UK?
Well, it's not for me to make the choices that the people need to make for their own governments. I would just point out that it is this government that is committed to spending 3.5% on GDP by 2035. That it is this government and this Prime Minister that committed to getting to 3% by 2030, and it's failing to do so. I would go further and say that we are living right now at the most dangerous period in our lifetimes. We have not had as dangerous a period of the possibility of great power war in Europe as we had since 1945. And under those circumstances, the question of whether you can find a few more tenths of a percent for defense spending in a budget or with more taxes, as indeed the Dutch have done. The Dutch are reaching their 3.5% by raising taxes. Is something that needs to be debated. I saw your previous guest, it hasn't been debated. This is the maximum time to do it. And if there's one salutary possibility from John Healey's resignation, which I think is understandable but sad to see happen, is that we now can have this debate. Not only the question that you posed to me, but ask that question of the people. put the threat that we are facing around the world for Britain, for European security, against the needs of the people. And that is what government and politics is all about.
So what do you think Donald Trump will be making of all of this?
Oh, I'm not sure he's spending a lot of time thinking about that, to be very honest. I mean, he thinks that everybody is already spending 5% of GDP on defense, and we'll look at this as a shortcoming. It will, in some ways, prove everything that happens proves his point. His point is that Europe has not spent enough on defense. Here, there is a big political storm over the fact that the defense establishment thinks more needs to be spent on defense, and the political establishment is not able to garner the political will to do so. And I think he's likely to say, see, I told you, you should have done it earlier, and now we're not going to bail you out. You're on your own. That's not the message that I would want to send. It's not the message that Britain needs to hear. But spending more on defense is something that is in Britain's interest, as well as in the U.S. interest.
Ivo Dolder, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, earlier I got reaction to John Healey's resignation from General Sir Richard Barrons, who co-authored the Strategic Defence Review. Here's what he had to say. General Sir Richard Barrons, are you pleased that the former Defence Secretary John Healey has taken a stand by resigning, or does it leave the government in an utter mess on defence?
So my own view is I find all this deeply disappointing and extremely dangerous. I think the fact that John Healey has resigned is a very clear indication that this government has chosen neither to pay for nor implement the review that it agreed only a year ago.
And you said dangerous. Do you think the country is actually being put at risk by the decisions that this government are making, or perhaps better, not making on defence?
So I think that's clear from John Healey's resignation letter, and I absolutely agree with the analysis that this country knows perfectly well that it's living in a very dangerous world and we need to defend and secure ourselves better. And the current state of the armed forces, which are in the condition that we left them in at the end of the post-Cold War era, so a lesser demand for an easier time, that doesn't work. And the Defence Review charted how to fix it, including transformation for how you fight in the 21st century, which is very different to the 20th century. And we also acknowledge that we don't own the clock for this. The threats to the UK are driven by countries like Russia, and they get to choose when or whether they present a risk to the UK. So the decision not to fund the Defence Review properly, and nothing like quickly enough, means that we are just hoping that our enemies leave us alone.
Yeah, on a wing and a prayer, I guess. I mean, when you look at what John Healey said in his resignation letter, that the defence investment plan falls well short of what's required for defence and the country. He says the Prime Minister was unable, the Treasury unwilling to commit resources. Do you think the plan should be binned now, or does it still need to be published?
No, the Defence Investment Plan is the articulation of the government's Defence Review agreed a year ago. It explains how the 62 recommendations would be turned into programmes and activity, each of which sufficiently funded over a 10-year period, which is the defence planning line. Even when the review was signed off a year ago, we said, look, you get to a reasonable place in 10 years, but the world and our allies need us to be in a better place for 3 to 5 years. So you're going to have to find more money sooner. And what the government has decided to do is not to fund even that 10-year programme adequately in the first 4 years. So it's not more money sooner, it's actually less money sooner. That's the situation that we're in. And we look at those words really careful: unable and unwilling. So we spend £1.3 trillion of taxpayers' money, including borrowing, every year. We currently spend only 67 billion of that on defence. We spend way more than 300 billion on welfare. So it's not that there isn't enough money, it's just that the government is not willing or somehow incapable of choosing to spend the money that they get differently. And that, for me, is just now incompetent.
So I'm sorry, but they should go ahead and publish the plan or just spend a bit longer trying to find the money to make it work?
So they were never really going to publish the plan. It's obviously a very sensitive, huge secret document, but they were at least going to set out the big parameters of this. But right now, if the best that they can do is find about half the money of the 28 billion gap that we know we've all been looking at, is what they're actually fending off is announcing defence cuts in the world that we live in. And I find this absolutely unfathomable and also really dangerous. So the answer for me is stop, think again. If you can't find enough public money, and honestly, you just got to try harder to do that. It's not a question of affordability, it's just a question of very hard choices, which many members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, for whatever reason, and I don't agree with them, struggle. And if you can't find public money, go to the city. They will find you £50 billion in 4 years if you set the right terms. And that's not to rip off the taxpayer. That's just to use more of the money the country as a whole has. So there are more imaginative solutions. But for heaven's sake, accept the defence review as the right course of action for the world we live in and do it faster because the world is more dangerous. Now, don't think you're going to have to throw it away and just announce some cuts as if that didn't matter.
Number 10, a source there has said that the country's safer because of decisions that Keir Starmer has made. Your response to that?
Well, I would have agreed until this morning because the Strategic Defence Review did articulate how to do that. And what is so disappointing, as you can sense, to the point of anger, is that there was no point doing the review if they're never going to implement it. And so I don't believe this afternoon the country is safer. I believe the country is now much greatly at risk than it was yesterday.
So you feel, in a way, that your work co-authoring that defence review has been sort of wasted?
So the point I would make is if I knew this would happen, that we would articulate this transformation, that we would tough out some very difficult choices and agree 62 recommendations, if I knew that a year later they were not going to be funded, then I wouldn't have started. What would have been the point? I think the narrative of transformation is still really good. I think the shape of the programme, if properly funded, is good enough, but I'd like it to go faster. But if they're just going to abandon it, shouldn't have done it.
Just finally, have you been in touch with John Healey in the last few days or even today?
I am going to message him today to say how sorry I am that it has turned out this way, that I thought he did a great job with the review, and I think he's shown great integrity in stepping down at this point. He is, after all, one of the most loyal ministers Keir Starmer has ever had, and it's extraordinary that he's broken with him now, but that is the man of integrity doing what he believes is right, and I have to applaud him for that.
Well, Sam is back on the sofa with me here, and because we mentioned a little bit earlier about the by-election taking place in Makerfield next week, let's just bring you the names of the candidates standing. You can see them on your screen now. There are 14 in total. Well, Sam, I want to have a little bit more of a chat with you. And, you know, we saw this interview with Al Carns. He came into the studio, extraordinary, you know, didn't get any kind of permission to do the interview, but there he was, sitting on the sofa. Let's just recap a little bit what he said.
So within the situation, I need to do what is right by the armed forces. And if I don't think that's right, then I will absolutely consider my position. And from my perspective, at the moment, we have not closed with this deal. When we have closed with this deal, I will decide my position.
Right, so you're putting Number 10 on notice, effectively. If you don't get what you believe is right for the armed forces out of this defence investment plan, you will also follow John Healey out the door. I
will decide on my position within the government. I think we need to be really, really clear. There are two things that we need to look at. First is the capability, so the tanks, the ships, the bombs, the bullets that we give to our armed forces, the physical component. And then I've been really clear on one other issue, which isn't talked about, is the moral component. And that's about the Northern Ireland Legacy Act. And until we see changes in those two elements, I will definitely consider my position until they're changed.
Well, Sam, there he is, basically putting Number 10 on notice that, you know, they could have another resignation on their hands. How do you think Number 10 will respond to that?
Tumbleweed. And that's how they have responded so far. But let's be honest, Cathy, Number 10 isn't strong enough to pick a fight with somebody like Al Carns tonight. They are desperately looking for a replacement Defence Secretary that will accept the lower defence settlement that number 10 and number 11 are insisting on. Look, it seems like Keir Starmer is being forced to choose between Rachel Reeves, who would have to implement cuts to other departments, or more borrowing or tax rises to do what the MD wants, and he chose to side with her rather than John Healey, and any successor would be expected to take the same lower settlement that the world has been told isn't enough. So how do you fill that job? And there are names like Darren Jones. There's names like Al Carns. There are
well, he said he hadn't been offered it.
I mean, let's see where we get to. There are names like Dan Jarvis. All of this stuff is floating around, but critically, nothing. We are told that as part of its fight back, number 10 is ready to replace cabinet ministers in a week that resign because they want to join Andy Burnham's team. But there's nothing tonight to replace John Healey. It doesn't feel to me like the briefing about Keir Starmer's fight back is anything like matched by reality. We have a Prime Minister without authority, without political skills to get through difficult moments, who is bleeding his ability away to run the country. This all could move very quickly in 7 days when there's the by-election.
Yeah, so just in a word, everything that's happened today brings very much closer Keir Starmer, the end of his tenure in number 10.
Definitely.
Right. Well, that was... I did say in a word. I thought you'd maybe elaborate a little bit. But extraordinary day, extraordinary night. We say that so often, but it so much has been the case. I really appreciate you being here on the sofa to share all of that with me and all your expertise. That's it for tonight. See you again on Monday at 7.